G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day and so far a fantastic week. Now today was my MRI on my brain tumour. I won't have results for another 24 to 36 hours, but I will let you know how I go. I get a little bit sick off the dye they run through you in the MRI machine, so if I get a bit slow in this, I do apologise. But I hope that you're having as good a day as I am. So today we do have a lot to talk about. We need to look at missile strikes, and we need to talk specifically then about the Russia and Iskander missile too, and how we've seen so much more use of that very recently, and we'll talk maybe why that is. We had some messaging from a few months ago. We're going to talk at length about the reshuffle in Zelensky's government, in the government of Ukraine. We need to talk about the US and the US election and maybe some Russian influence on that election, of course, between Democrats, Republicans. Is there Russian influence? How much Russian influence is there? Which way is it? Because I disagree with most of the messaging out there about the mainstream. But we're going to talk about that at length. US politics, 50% of you already clicked off. That is okay. And then, of course, we'll have a look at the maps and see where things are moving, as some things are moving in some other areas of which we didn't really expect. And we've seen redeployment of some very experienced soldiers as well. Legends, everyone is busier than ever between traveling to and from school or work, finding time to grocery shop, getting your meal prep together, even getting your serving size right is very difficult. And I know a lot of the time I struggle to find time, or if I do, I have a lot of food wastage and therefore I'm throwing money down the drain, or I power through, I overeat and I put on a couple of kilos. Well, today's video sponsor, HelloFresh, makes this easy. Not only am I eating healthier, but I'm eating way better tasting meals than I ever have before. Lily and I last night, we made the loaded pork jacket potatoes and it was absolutely delicious. And we actually had a great time cooking together. We are very busy people. We work full time and we struggle to find time to make it to the shops and have the ingredients just on hand to actually make something healthy, tasty, that fits our calorie goals. Well, HelloFresh is pre-packaged and pre-portioned, so you don't need to even worry about this. It is super easy, and there's heaps of variety. HelloFresh has increased its healthy options more than ever, with well over 50 dinner options with different calorie smart or protein smart choices depending on your goals. And they say that breakfast is the most important meal of the day. So start your day right with free breakfast for life, and you'll get one free breakfast item per box while your subscription is active. So you can use the QR code above, click the link in the description or the pinned comment, and you can use the code WILLY, OAM, SEP10, and you'll receive 10 free meals and free breakfast for life. You'll get one breakfast item per box while your subscription is active if you're in the US, and the link and code are valid in all countries, but the respective local discount may change slightly. But thank you, HelloFresh, for sponsoring this video and filling up my stomach with delicious tasting food. Where I want to start is with the strike. So yesterday, as I opened the video, I did say that we had reports that there was a mass missile strike again across Ukraine. Now, this is, I guess, an estimation of where these went. Now, the majority of them, but including both the missiles and the drones, then went towards Lviv, although there was some in other directions as well. Now, what we can see here by Ukraine's numbers is the interception rate. And something that is interesting on this is you can see some of these haven't been intercepted at all, and then some high numbers on others. The amount of air defense, specifically Patriot systems that Ukraine has, is not enough to be everywhere at once. So when there's movement somewhere, there has to be allocation of resource, meaning somewhere else is going to be left open. And I think that is where Russia is having some more success, at least having strikes on location, what they're trying to hit with these missiles. But I want to talk about these Iskanders, because if you have noticed, like I have, we have seen a huge, significant increase in not only the amount of Iskanders that Russia has, but their effectiveness on frontline areas. And of course, with that kill chain, so time of spotting target to time of hit has been drastically shortened since the beginning of the war. And we have spoken at length across the last 6 months about this interoperability between the drones and then those Iskanders. Now, this it doesn't, regardless of if it's hitting a decoy or a target, because, well, it still shows that kill chain and the amount of these to be used has definitely increased as well. So let's have a look over this. And what this brought to mind, and I've been meaning to talk about this for a few days, is I can't show you this footage here on the Telegram if you'd like to see, but at this geolocation here, so just to the southeast of Sumy, there was a large agglomeration of Ukrainian forces here, has been hit by an Iskander with, from the footage, there would be large casualties at this. And let's have a look then. A few months back in April, we got reports through that Iskander-M missile production soars in Russian military push from a Russian spokesman saying the missiles being churned out much larger numbers than in previous years. And from what we've seen between April and what we're seeing now, particularly around Sumy, that seems now to be coming to fruition. But in my opinion, maybe even a bigger shift than that is the reports that we have seen that the Iskanders are moving from specific missile brigades and then coming under the command of artillery brigades. So the artillery commanders have much more capabilities on hand, but then can have that Iskander missile capability then straight away, then reducing that kill chain time frame. So you've got the Iskander being at use through a frontline element to, or second, third line element of the artillery, and of course their observers in this as well, including your drones and your forward observers also. And then you're not going one element to another to try and get missile on target. It's all kept in-house. And I think that, as much as the production may be increasing, I think that has actually been the biggest shift that we've seen in this. And I've also speculated online, and I'll put an interview below with a PhD about the possibility that Russia has improved the guidance on the Iskander to be laser guided, because of course this is a massive electronic warfare degraded environment. So I'll link that below. And how could that then have a play in this war? If you've got a drone in the air lasing something and the Iskander hit it, to my eye, that would improve not only the accuracy due to the diminished radio environment, but also that kill chain. And could it be done? Well, that's why I talked to a PhD specifically working in that area. Now, let's have a look at the maps. Let's have a look at where some things are changing. So, of course, here is Ukraine in the center, the capital of Kyiv. The red area is occupied since 22, the purple since 2014. The green and blue is either liberated territory that Ukraine has brought back, or territory that they are occupying into the Kursk Oblast. Now, firstly, Kursk Oblast, there is no change seen on the deep state map. Noel reports as well. No change on his map either. But where I want to move straight down into is then the Pokrovsk front. So Avdiivka, Pokrovsk, and then of course we have Bakhmut here. Now, there are reports that Ukraine is reinforcing the Pokrovsk direction with the 93rd Mechanized Brigade. And this is one of Ukraine's most experienced and well-equipped brigades. And the reports are that these units are moving specifically from Chasiv Yar here, Bakhmut front, then down to Pokrovsk. So there is other reporting saying, could we now see movement start in Chasiv Yar? As Syriac has been reporting that for the last few days, that there are still some movements in here. And we have seen 93rd Mech before deploy into some very hot spots, for example, Bakhmut and Soledar. And will this stop the Russian advance in the sector? Will it be able to stabilize this sector? Maybe will there even be a counter on the flanks of this sector? We don't know. But stability operations are always tough. And the question that comes first into mind is, what conditions are these guys then rolling into here? Because these are well-equipped, experienced, well-trained fighters. You don't want to then put these guys into an area where there is not the conditions for them to be set up to have the best defense, because if you don't have good defensive works, you may have highly experienced, highly trained and highly equipped fighters then have large casualties as well. You don't want to put that experience and kit into areas where you're going to have very large losses. Now, in a perfect world, you'd have your lower trained holders hold areas, and then you're better trained for offensive operations as well. But we have seen the defensive lines since Avdiivka push back to advantageous positions again and again and again. So there is legitimate question as to what defensive works lie in here. But I do want to line this up with a little bit more information when we look at maybe some doctrine around this as well. I just need to find it as I've put it in here. So the professional war forces from a high end of its army becoming fire brigades, moving from sector to sector in battle to stabilise the situation and conduct defensive attacks. Here we go. So we're getting more of your professional forces, the high end, moving to try and stabilise that situation. Low-end formations, they hold the line and gain experience, slowly increasing their quality until they can gain the capability to conduct offensive operations. Victory is attained by creating the highest quality low-end formations possible. So the better your low-end, it doesn't matter what your SAS and Delta and whatever forces way up the top is in a large, protracted, attritional war. It's the best quality low end of your formation. So these guys are moving from one sector to try and stabilize. But on the flip side of attritional war, what Russia will be trying to do is then create chaos at that area of which they've then pulled out in and extend that back and forth. So wherever you've got pressure, there's always going to be a problem. That's what they'll be doing, and this is what the Ukrainian side is doing as well. And this is why I mentioned the low-end formations holding the line. The better your defensive works, the safer those guys are, the less experienced they need to be moving into those locations, the less losses you'll have. So those guys then gain experience, and then it rolls over and over and over. Forging new units in combat-capable soldiers instead of civilian mobs is done through training and combat experience. A new formation should train for at least 6 months, and only if manned by reservists with previous individual training. I've seen people throw around 4, 6, 8 weeks of training. I was in the military myself. That amount to roll into the front line, unless you're purely defensive somewhere or maybe checkpoint, Christ. Conscripts take longer. These units should have also have professional soldiers and NCOs brought in from pre-war army to add professionalism. This is something, of course, that we did in Afghanistan with soldiers tied into Afghan national stuff. We see this through a lot of wars. We've recently seen Russia actually do this into Belarus. That Wagner went across and integrated within those forces to get experience. We've also seen the VDV do that in Bakhmut this year as well, to try and bring up that bottom line, again, the highest quality low-end formations as possible. Once initial training is complete, they should only be fed into battle in secondary sectors, gain experience. No formation should be allowed to fall below 70% strength. Withdrawing formations early allows experience to proliferate among new replacements as veterans pass on their skills. Otherwise, valuable experience is lost, causing the process to start all over. This is the problem and the concern of putting in those high-end formations into areas, depending on how built up that area actually is for defense. Another implication is that resources should prioritize replacements over new formations, preserving combat edge in both pre-war army, your high, and newly raised low formations. It's advisable to disband several pre-war high-end formations to spread professional soldiers among newly created low-end formations in order to raise initial quality. This is something that isn't spoken about that much, but this is in a lot of planning and major conflicts around the shock troops and the disbanding of troops to bring up that initial quality of soldiers. I actually went through it on this, but about a year ago, about if there was a major invasion into Australia, your actual pre-war army, like the army right now, would not exist only a few weeks after that. You'd have a lot of them go in that shock and stabilizing your high end. You'd have large losses, but to try and stabilize that line. The other ones who didn't do that would move to train reserves better and or then conscripts as well. So again, victory is attained by creating the highest quality low-end formations as possible. Of course, this is very hard if you're struggling on experience, you're struggling on mobilization to then build that up in an attritional war as well. But this is how you then win. So let's have a look at the maps, and we're around this sector, Pokrovsk in here. No changes shown on this map, but Syriac hasn't released his maps today either, but I want to show you a couple of different maps here too. So we have AMK mapping here as well. Typically, I don't use this for no other reason than I just use the ones I typically then use here. And he's showing that geolocated footage indicates Russian forces continue to advance behind the Ukrainian-held salient of Krasnohivka-Nevelsky axis. So this is Krasnohivka, this is Nevelsky, and somewhere to keep just an eye on is a Zelene Persha down in here. Remember, some maps show significantly further push into here, and this map itself is showing right in here far more ground being taken than shows even grey on this map here. Also, remember, live UA map shows through Lizivka and down to Zelene Persha as well. So let's then push into his map of south in here. So what we looked at yesterday was Syriac map spoke about a large step back from the front line here, foregoing some of the previous 2014 line that sat here due to some of the roads and Russian offensives in here. If Zelena Persha has fallen, we don't yet know, it would explain why there already reports the armed forces of Ukraine is beginning to withdraw from Krasnohivka-Nevelsky salient. This is this in here. This is because the southern outskirts of Zelena Persha are less than 1 kilometre from the last sealed road leading out of the salient. So this is then the road here, the last paved road out of here. Remember, the conditions here are going to get worse and worse in the later in then the year. Paved roads, movements on the front become more difficult. So will we see a withdrawal back then to move out of the salient in here and a step forward? This would make sense of why we've seen Russia pushing so hard in Krasnohivka this year and harder around Kharkivka maybe later on this year, as we have seen as well. So again, with all of this, predictions and stuff are very, very hard to make and dangerous to make in many regards. So just watch and wait and we'll see where things start moving, because with this war, time will tell us some of the truths at least. Anyway, so then we just moved to the south of here near Vuhledar. Now, this is why many people are saying Russia's primary goal is in here first before maybe a push on Pokrovsk or simultaneous as well. And we are seeing a lot of capability being used down in here to try and make ground. And today on this map, you can see this area in here then being closed up by the Russian forces. And we have a couple of maps to look at here too. This first one is by Noel Reports, a Ukrainian source in here too. So if we look at where Pavlivka is, this can be a little bit hard just on the zooming, that he has shown Pavlivka has been under control, but a push right out here near Preshchitizka as well, that he's showing that this is coming under control too. Then Deep State is showing more of a fill-in even behind here than today. So multiple maps showing that this area here has then come under control. AMK mapping says this as well, that this area has likely come under control. They've likely captured this in the Vuhledar direction. There's no visual confirmation of these reports, but with everyone saying it, with these maps showing it, yes, that would make sense. Little resistance is reported in the eastern residential areas. However, it appears Ukrainian forces will push to the village centre. Was that moving through here? We presume trying to then come around and bypass Vuhledar, where we've seen Russia throw resources for years at this with no real successful break-in. So again, watch and wait for what happens in here. But we do have another update in here as well on Noel Reports' map between Konstantinivka and Vodiani. So this is a little bit hard to see, but let's have a look. So this down here is Vuhledar. Vodiani then is right on here on his map, and then we have Konstantinivka up here. So what he is showing, zoom in on this road, that the Russian forces have gained all of this road, all the way down to about Vodiani. He doesn't show the movement to the west of this road into Vodiani that this map shows. So if we were to put these two together, we can sort of presume that it's probably looking like this today. I think I'd be safe to say that, knowing the different maps that we are looking at across this sector. And that will just move north just a little bit and we'll come up into Bakhmut. We do see two changes here. Just to the west of New York, push up to this road, as well as this movement in Druzhba. This movement in Druzhba was shown across NOAA reports and Syriac's maps then yesterday, so it's nothing really that new to us, but I want to read this because I've seen this encirclement in here. And AMK says, we all doubted Deep State and laughed at them for the New York map, but today a reliable Russian source reported that there is still a hotbed of Ukrainian resistance in this plant in New York. It appears there's still a garrison hold up in the plant, a bit like a mini Azov style, of course, in Mariupol. They're likely surrounded on all sides and under siege. So we have questioned this before. This has been here for now well over a week, but there are Russian sources saying that apparently there's still an element hold up in here. So we will see if there's a recovery operation to try and bring these guys out or what exactly happens in here. Then we're just north a little bit more. Now, Klishkivka, Bakhmut front, doesn't show any movement across into Chasiv Yar other than the micro-district, but across the canal here, like Syriac is saying, and like people are suggesting now that we've seen the 93rd move from this front down into Pokrovsk, may we see some more shift there. But NOAA reports is showing this. He's showing large movement then around Klishkivka itself. So let's have a look. So we can see where this canal runs through here. You can see Klishkivka. This is not the easiest to get a hold of, but so Klishkivka, he's showing, has come fully under control, down to Andrivka. A lot of this is coming under control. And see this tree line? That the tree line here has come a lot under control also. So he's showing that a lot more, somewhat something like this, has come under control. Importantly, up to the canal here that's working as a natural barrier between a lot of the forces here where Russia got up to before and was then, of course you can see, then pushed back. So a watch and a wait on this front and exactly what is happening there. But on other areas of the front, not showing too much change. Now, let's have a look at the US election and the supposed Russian influence on this. So let's look at what has actually come out, I guess, in the media specifically about this, and I've got my notes on the side. We'll run through this. From CNN, the Biden administration announced a sweeping set of actions to tackle major Russian government-backed effort to influence the 24 US presidential election on Wednesday, including unveiling criminal charges against 2 Russian nationals, sanctions on 10 individuals and entities, and a seizure of 32 internet domains. At Russian President Vladimir Putin's direction, 3 Russian companies used fake profiles to promote false narratives on social media. US Deputy Attorney General Melissa Monaco said in a statement, internal documents produced by one of the Russian companies show one of the goals of the propaganda effort was to boost the candidacy of former President Donald Trump or whoever emerged as the Republican nominee for president, according to the FBI affidavit. Now, a lot of this affidavit stuff has things blanked out of candidate, a party, but read between the lines of where CNN and where the Democrats are trying to post this as well. A Tennessee Front company produced online content aiming at sowing division amongst Americans. Now, if you know anything about former then information campaigns outwardly from even the Soviet Union, which we know actually the best of because, of course, a lot of declassified documents, defectors, and the collapse there, but I believe a lot of that's still very relevant, was aimed at division. Not aimed at one or the other, it's aimed at division. This is why there's a hell of a lot, probably the most hotbed topic in America sowing divide right now is the Israel-Palestine conflict, what is happening there and how that can be used for not only sowing division, but of course in the right ways too, of people angry about the situation that is occurring there. We'll talk about that at length. Taken together, the actions represent the Biden administration's most significant public response yet to alleged Russian influence operations targeting American voters. So I've got some notes here that I want to read through. Now, one thing I will say is, like I said, we know a lot about some of the information campaigns out of the Soviet Union, and Putin himself was ex-KGB, so I think we can take a lot of this stuff still as somewhat relevant as well. Now, what I ask is, where is the line between propaganda and media supporting a side? So you'll see some media is super pro this, some media super pro there. Where does that lie in election interference as well, even by outside media too? remember, this is all part of one big informational sphere. Just because it's from X politician doesn't mean that it isn't as propagandary as from X media source as far as election interference also. As you can see, where CNN or Fox may write, use language, blah, 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 to push agendas also. But I do ask in this, to what effect? How much actual influence is there from the Russians if they are doing this? How much influence actually is there on the election? Is it 1%, 10%, 50%? How much realistically is there? And sowing division in the US is definitely in the interests of then its enemies, and campaigns there have been going on for a century. We know a lot about these. But like I say, from my outside perspective, I don't see how successful these are beyond the division that media, celebrities, social movements, and political candidates already push. I don't see how much more successful this will be than that. As far as election interference, I think if you were to look outwardly and inwardly, you wouldn't just be looking at the Kremlin. I'd be looking into a lot of journalist offices, celebrities, other politicians from around the world. Also, in the world of which we're going into, it's going to be impossible to try and limit any of this. Now, I say here, my limited understanding, only open source, but I'd say somewhat above average of just your average person of Russia's intelligence agencies and their larger strategy, due to, I just read a shitload about this all the time, it does not fall in line with the promotion of the Republican Party, especially Donald Trump. So my knowledge of where the FSB, SVR, Russia's overall strategy, where those intelligence agencies are pushing, it doesn't make sense to me that they would then try and influence the election to benefit Trump. Putin often refers to traditional values, these conservative values that they'll often try and paint themselves, Russia, Putin, as the last bastion of European values. We've seen this with, known SVR, FSB, Wagner information operations in Africa. These are aimed at discrediting what we typically would call the West woke ideology, religiosity, nuclear family, marriage, LGBT. They're trying to show that and show that Russia is the last bastion of this. And there's nothing more, proof that they're trying to paint this than Putin's recent decree, which we went over in this, aimed to give, quote, humanitarian support to those who oppose the destructive neoliberal ideological agenda of the West. So opening up, hey, you can come over here if you're being criminalized by that agenda. What I'm trying to say is that where Russia's trying to paint themselves as a bastion of conservative traditional values, that doesn't show me why they would try, if they're trying to divide, why they'd be pushing on Trump. Trump's vowed to end this war, and this is where I could be wrong. Trump's vowed to end this war. So if Russia does think they can win, if they are looking, yep, we can push through to wherever, they won't want him to win. But if they're looking for a way to end the war and get out, this is why maybe they would be pushing on Trump. That's maybe more low-level strategic tactical level, but the high-end strategy, look, unipolar, multipolar world strategies, division, painting Russia as one thing and the West as another, doesn't make sense to me. And like I've said here, in my opinion, Trump is the kryptonite to this vision Putin is trying to paint of the West. Just because there's a relationship between Putin and Trump and maybe some similar views on some points, this is the exact reason, in my opinion, it goes against Russia's strategic interests as they see them and the hybrid warfare campaign. If Russia believe that they're the savior of traditional, just conservative society, and that the ideals of Western liberal ideals are the downfall, why would then it try and influence a Trump win that is saying many of the same things against traditionally the largest competitor to the US being Russia and China? That's where it just doesn't line up to me. It seems some of the values you want to push over here if you want to cause this division. And this is why I think my take on this is vastly different from where maybe the Democrats are trying to paint of what is happening to discredit the other side. Could you see this as well as a way of election interference? Where's the line between propaganda, information, news reporting, and interference on this? And you could paint me right now as doing the same thing. So my question is, which has a greater impact on how countries view the West? Russian or Chinese influence through intelligence and information campaigns, or the influence of mainstream media, Western governments, and universities, that outward? What is more changing how people out of the West view the West? Information campaigns by China or Russia, or things that the West is doing? We need to consider how effective these campaigns really are. In my view, the impact of Russian efforts to support Republicans, or Democrats, I'll say, but let's say for Republicans, it's probably less significant than the Democrats' ability to use the narrative to discredit the Republicans. So if the Democrats can find evidence that there was some level of impact by the Kremlin into try and support the Republicans, whatever impact that would have to boost up the Republicans, I reckon tenfold the Democrats would have for more influence on that to discredit than the Republican side. I think the Democrats would love to find that. Propaganda doesn't need to lie, but present the truth in the appropriate form. This is where we see good propaganda, intelligence operations work it's a Venn diagram of it, of you're presenting something that's true, but in the appropriate form to push your narrative further. Again, what's causing more division in the West? Russian or China, internally in the West, not how the West is viewed. Russian or Chinese campaigns, or the campaigns coming from media, politicians, education systems, namely universities as well. This is propaganda in the appropriate form. Is there this idea of the reduction of the nuclear family, religiosity, conservative values in the West? Yes. Therefore, in propaganda, Russia can pick that up and they can use that to push whatever narrative then they want. Again, this is why I don't see the push on the Republican side if I was overarching looking at the strategic outcome of where Russia see and where the US may be seeing strategic goals as well. My question is not if this exists or not, it is how much influence does it have, and then why, if it has influence, why is it then being successful? Again, successful propaganda need not to lie, but present the truth in the appropriate form. So if Russia, they're trying to paint this idea of a conservative, quote, last bastion of European values, this and this and this, that won't have any pickup if people in the West don't feel as if that is somewhat true as well. Good propaganda can't just be a blatant lie. I tried to get going that I had a massive knob for years. That's not going to work. But if there's some level of truth in it, it may actually then work. Does that make sense? Probably a long way around of going, I don't get why would push on the Republicans when it seems like Trump is the kryptonite to what Putin's trying to paint of the West. Now, Ukrainian government had a large reshuffle the other day, and I want to talk, Jen, a little bit about this. As popularity fades, Volodymyr Zelensky culls his cabinet. This is from The Economist. On Wednesday, Ukraine's parliament convened to approve an unexpected wave of resignations. It was start of President Volodymyr Zelensky's first major wartime shakeup, a merry-go-round of promotions and dispatches to irrelevance. The result, which saw even members of his own party mocking the proceedings and 3 of the 7 votes failing, hinted at increasing dysfunction within the government. Those lined up for dismissal included these heavyweights of 2 deputy prime ministers, the justice minister, Alexander Kamyshin, who I'm sure you've seen before. But I think the best known here, and this says it, of course, is Dmytro Kuleba, who I've spoken about before. Of course, the foreign minister, a lot of relationships outside of Ukraine too, incredibly important. But Zelensky said it needs new structure. He will not have missed the massive drop in government popularity registered by polls in recent months. With elections cancelled during the war, this is one of the only levers he could pull. And we need to talk about what effect this can have as well, about reduction in popularity, cancellation of course, elections with martial law going on and what problems that can run into, but also where that can be helped as well. Now, what I've seen some people point at on the Russian, sort of pro-Russian side, is Kulaba was dismissed because he could be a threat to Zelensky's power and Zelensky's actual position. And then I've also looked at a lot of Ukrainian pages who are saying if he ran, I'd vote for him. So that's an interesting part, I guess, to pick up in here too. But tensions between President and his foreign minister have been growing since the full-scale invasion of 2022. Mr. Kulaba became respected amongst foreign diplomats in Kyiv and in the West, but in his sophisticated diplomacy did not always align with the raw and emotional rhetoric of his boss. I liked Kulaba's suits too, but to the president's office, the complaint that with Mr. Kulaba avoided getting his hands dirty. They think he just liked to collect victories, says one MP from the president's blog. He doesn't see things through. So some large criticisms there, very late in the war for what is happening here with those relationships made and the rapport between leaders. Several sources close to the president suggested that pressure from America's state government prevented the switch from happening back in April of foreign ministers. With the election season underway in America, the focus is now elsewhere, one source notes. So now switch it, maybe people won't notice. Given the centralization that is already happening during wartime, the ministerial changes are unlikely to have a serious impact either on the government, front lines, and in eastern Ukraine. This is what I disagree with. In a attritional, protracted, prolonged war, stable government of which people trust in is one of the absolute key elements to having the public support ongoing for years and years to come. If this war is to be won militarily, there are years to go, not months, not weeks, years and years to go. Could be a bloody decade, realistically, with the shifts that we see on the line and the amount of training that is going to have to occur for higher end weapon systems, planes, everything overall. That is, if it doesn't expand much wider. The consolidation power around Volodymyr Zelensky's influential chief of staff, Andrew Yermak, they had loyal people around them, says this bloke, an opposition MP, but now they have even more loyal ones. So speaking that the loyalty, internal loyalty, has been built. But does this mean you're getting rid of people that may criticise back as well? And that is incredibly important. You can't just surround with yes men. And this is something we see, and it's written really well in here. This is about the Soviet Union, the KGB, and problems that they were having because people were too scared to criticize. You can't just have yes men. You also need pushback. And this is where they say in this, the communist and authoritarian regimes with a vertical hierarchy start having problems. That one-party states have an inherent disadvantage when it comes to intelligence analysis, since analysts usually fear to tell the party hierarchy what it does not want to hear. So this is something you need to be careful of, is the failure when you only have yes men. That successors similarly knew that they were taking no risks if they used the United States as a scapegoat. So within the KGB, within the Soviet Union, that they would just blame the Americans and everything will be okay. Now, I'm not saying that this is authoritarian. I'm not saying this is dictator. I'm not saying this or that. But with martial law, where people can't vote, and judging by what people in Ukrainian government are saying, that it's just built more loyalty there too. This can be a problem if you just have yes men rather than legitimate criticism of what is happening, because criticisms can change how things are going. And one of those is the ability to vote as well and change this. While postponing elections can be seen as a deviation, this is about martial law, from normal democratic practice in the context of war, a temporary measure in the context of emergency, and that will be a restoration of democracy. It's not typically viewed as authoritarian, but rather as a pragmatic response to extraordinary circumstances. There are still remaining concerns in public trust and erosion of democratic norms and the concentration of power. So there are real concerns about when normal democratic practices does get shifted due to martial law. This doesn't mean it's then authoritarian, but there are then concerns about how public then trusts that government of which at that point they haven't voted for, and how it may erode democratic norms into the future, and of course that concentrated power in one. But what I'd love someone to do, and I think like Perun would do a really good job of this, is break down for like industry prolonged war. And I'm going to do some walking into this. And there's probably not great examples more recently, but is the difference between countries that are democratic capitalist and more authoritarian autocracy, maybe in a way too. But if a country is under law, martial law, and has no election, typically indicates a highly authoritarian or dictatorial regime. The reason I showed you just before is martial law, due to extraordinary circumstances, doesn't exactly mean this as well. But the implication of martial law and no elections is you have a concentrated concentration of power without checks and balances given by typical democratic practices like elections and, of course, the courts, which you know, if you read anything about corruption, is a big problem of the courts in Ukraine as well. The suppression of civil liberties. People 18 to 60 can't leave if you have a penis. 3 is the lack of political accountability. Without elections, government is not held accountable to the public and, of course, can shift more people around. Potential for social unrest. Lack of democratic process and suppression of freedoms can lead to social unrest, even rebellion. I still believe that this is a real problem that could happen further down the line for both Russia and Ukraine. I believe this is, if we start seeing like unbelievably huge losses sweeping across land, whatever, I still think that this is a real threat that could occur. I actually think this is more what a lot of the West is trying to push into Russia too, and I'll include Ukraine in that, with striking like oil and gas and the amount of losses to try and have like civil unrest in Russia and topple there too. But it's hard to know because I think America's like, we don't want to topple that because we don't know who's then coming in. Economic and social consequences. Regimes under martial law may prioritize security over economic and social well-being. This is far different than at wartime also. But I want to continue on about what I spoke about before. For the advantages and disadvantages of more authoritarian governments. Remember that this can be a spectrum as well. Everything can be a spectrum these days, except if you're criticizing, I guess, this war. But what I want to look at is more authoritarian regimes, say Russia or China, versus, say, a lot of Western countries around what is actually beneficial in wartime. Of course, authoritarian, you have a centralized decision-making hub. Therefore, typically, if you read anything about intelligence agencies, the intelligence is actually more secure, but of course it doesn't have that critique, so it can be misconstrued people can be too scared to actually criticize it. You have efficient resource mobilization that can direct resource and manpower more efficiently. The cost of labor then is significantly lower. Therefore, the ability to make more weapons and just direct people to make those weapons is much higher. This is why we can see the price of which Russia or North Korea can pump out weapons. Now, I'm not talking about the quality or ethics behind building those weapons, say North Korea, but the cost of labor and what you can get out can be significantly high. A unity of command, a single undisputed leadership can provide clear direction and prevent internal dissent. This is why you have martial law in times of war, and suppression of dissent. You are better at suppressing internal dissent, which can be critical in maintaining national unity and focus on a conflict. This is what people spoke about in the West, say America, Australia, that regardless of what war then occurred, you'd have like such a polarizing shift on it. The ability to actually then recruit manpower to build weapons or go and fight would be so low because the suppression of that would be, well, I would have said it was quite low until I saw the UK. But the disadvantages here, of course, you have a lack of accountability, reduced innovation because you don't have free thinking and open debate. This is where we see a lot come, say, in these highly creative democratic countries like America. You have massive innovation. A risk of overreach, aggressive strategies that can then backfire, and long-term consequences around social cohesion, eroding trust in institutions and damaging the economy. But historical examples, lack of accountability and overreach ultimately contributed to the downfall of Nazi Germany or Japan as well. Democratic nations in wartime, countries the US, UK have maintained democratic governance during wartime, although with some levels of martial law as well. They benefited from a balance of power and the ability to adapt through open debate and innovation. So it opens up to that rather than something more authoritarian or more of a hybrid democracy. Then also it would be very, very interesting if Ukraine was pressured by the US and the US paid for the elections to see what would actually come out in this. And my question is in this, in a protracted, prolonged attritional war, long term, after that initial blows, what one would actually maybe be more successful overall when it comes down to just building weapons, just recruiting manpower or being able to mobilize manpower as well. It's probably a hybrid between the two, like we see with martial law and X in power. But again, it's an interesting thing to then think about. Legend's way longer than I hoped. I hope that you're having a fantastic day, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.